What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. And if you're new here, my name is Eric Cartafalsa. I trained myself into the low 90s, and now I help guys all over the world make the same transformation. And all we really do on this channel is talk about throwing 90 miles per hour. So if you don't want to hear about throwing 90, then click away. In this video today, I'm going to be going over a general framework of what your training should look like if you're trying to throw 90 miles per hour. But I don't want to waste any more time here. Let's get right into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over section by section what your training should look like. We're going to cover throwing, lifting, mobility, and then speed and plyometric work. So starting off with throwing, your throwing should be athletic focused over drill focused. Now, what does this mean? Okay, you should be doing throws that keep you athletic, right? Because when the foundation of your throwing is just mostly drills, then that is what causes you to be tense and robotic. And this happened to me when I was playing. I would really just focus on doing drills as the majority of my throwing, and I found myself overthinking my mechanics constantly. But when I moved into an athletic style of throwing, right, throwing like an infielder, throwing like a catcher, throwing like an outfielder, doing different variations, putting my body in different positions, then I was able to stop overthinking, and I really freed myself up in my pitching delivery. Okay, so when you're trying to throw 90, it's really important for you to actually train that output, train that high intent energy system, because the mistake that I see a lot of guys make is they don't train hard enough, okay? They're scared of throwing with high intensity outside of game situations because one, they think they're not going to recover good enough, and two, they're scared they're going to get hurt. And I understand that concern because a lot of guys do throw the wrong way, they mistime their intent, and they end up getting hurt. But if you time it the right way and you do high intensity throwing 2 times a week, then you will be in a good spot. As long as you space those days out and have a certain number of throws that you do on each day, right? So you're not overdoing it. Now, this is gonna differ in the off season versus the spring when you're actually playing, okay? So it's going to be a little bit tougher during the spring to get 2 high intensity days in, but in the off season, when you're doing the majority of your high intent work, you could schedule this like a pull down day on Monday and 100% velocity focused bullpen on Friday, right? So you have plenty of time in between those to recover. And the reason you want to be training high intensity, high output so often is because that's how you teach your body to move fast, okay? You need to mold your pitching mechanics into high velocity pitching mechanics. And there's no better way to do that than by actually training those energy systems, actually pushing the envelope and throwing hard, okay? So that can be done through things like pull downs, through long toss, and through athletic catch, right? As well as velocity bullpens. Long toss is one of the most tried and true methods to actually gain velocity, and you want to be doing this pretty often, okay? So getting out to your max distance, whatever that may be, and then throwing pull downs on the way in, okay? And it's important when you're long tossing to keep all of your throws on an arc when you're going out. It's a common misconception that when you're doing long toss, you want to keep all your throws on a line no matter what. You don't want to do this, okay? You want your arm to fully stretch out as you get to your max distance. And I actually found this method a long time ago through Allen Jaeger. I'm a huge fan of his long toss program. I think he is kind of the godfather of long toss. But anyway, getting into velocity bullpens, I touched on it a little bit before to where, you want to be throwing as hard as you can off the mound at least once a week in the off season, right? Because you're going to be doing certain drills, and I'll get to this in a second. You're going to be doing certain drills to clean up your mechanics once you have an athletic base laid down, okay? And then you want to give yourself an opportunity to test those new movements under high output, okay? So that's why you want to do high velocity bullpens, and usually these are somewhere between 15 to 20 pitches, and a really important part of that is actually tracking your velocity, okay? You want to have like a chart or a piece of paper where you write down what your velocity was on a certain day and then try to beat that number the following week, right? Because it's very, very hard to make progress if you're not actually tracking what you're doing and tracking the results, okay? So I touched a little bit on the drills. When are we actually doing those, okay? You can still do drills. I'm not anti-drill, okay, by any means, but they shouldn't be the foundation of your throwing. Now, when do you actually want to do drills? You want to do those on days where you're throwing flat grounds or just playing catch normally, because you want to work on those movements at lower intensities first, right? If you can't do something, slow, you're not going to be able to do it fast, okay? So learning what drills you need depending on your mechanical deficiencies is really important. Taking those drills, doing them at lower intensities, and then being able to blend them on the mound, which brings me to my next point, mound blending, okay? A lot of people don't know about this, okay? And basically what mound blending is, it's taking a certain drill that you're doing, okay, and bringing it to the mound. So for example, if I'm doing like a lasso drill or an abbreviated arm action step back, then I'm gonna do that drill, that variation on the mound, right? Because at the end of the day, it's really easy to, do a certain movement on flat ground, but as pitchers, we're obviously going to be competing on a slope. We're going to be competing on the mound. So that's where we want our actual drill work to show up, right? So going back to mound blending, for example, you could do 3 throws out of an abbreviated slot on the mound and then go right into your delivery. And what this is going to do, it's going to start teaching your brain and teaching your body that, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing on the mound, right? Because it's motor learning, right? Taking things that we do at lower intensities and actually applying them to the mound. So mound blending, super important, okay? This can also be done on flat ground. I'm not a huge fan of throwing flat grounds instead of bullpens, but we want to still be working on the things we need to work on pretty often, right? So say you have a day where you throw 90 feet and you're doing your athletic catch, you're doing your drill work. At the end of that throwing session, you can move it into 60 feet and start throwing a flat ground, right? And you can throw out of your certain drills and mix it in with your delivery, right? Because we want to start to bridge the gap between the drill and your actual delivery, okay? So mound blending and flat grounds are 2 really, really good ways to go about this. And the last point I have for throwing is better thrower equals better pitcher, okay? Now, what does that mean? All of the best pitchers that I've seen, all the guys that throw hard, all the guys that, are really good pitchers are good at throwing in general, right? So there's a reason why your shortstop can hop up on the mound and randomly throw harder than most of the guys on the pitching staff. It's because he is just an athlete. He's a really good thrower, okay? So he doesn't have to overthink his mechanics on the mound. And that is what we're trying to get to as pitchers. Now, a big problem that I see is guys becoming PO'd and just becoming unathletic, okay? This happened to me in high school. I became a PO my freshman year, and then I stopped doing throws from the infield. I stopped doing throws from the outfield, and I just focused on drills, right? And that's how I got really robotic. That's how I started to overthink my mechanics. But when I went back to throwing like an athlete more often, I was able to unlock the way my body wanted to move, and I stopped overthinking, okay? So the better we can become at throwing in general, the better pitcher we will become. Okay, so now getting into lifting. This is where I see a lot of guys mess up, okay? So first I'm gonna start it off with the fact that compound movements are king. Okay, there are so many guys who say that benching is bad for baseball, who say that you shouldn't deadlift because it puts stress on your lower back. And to some degree, those things are true, but if you're doing them the right way and with the right volume and workload, then you're going to be completely fine. And this is actually a huge performance boost. Okay, so doing compounds, especially if you haven't really trained much before, is going to build a base level of strength, okay? So, a trap bar deadlift, a bench press, a front squat, I'm not a huge fan of back squats, are all going to be great movements for you to start to produce power on the mound, okay? And we want to be training 3 to 4 times a week max, okay? Lifting culture is really popular, and I understand, going to the gym, getting a pump, and just trying to get big as possible is awesome. I did it myself, and it didn't really translate to pitching velocity. So we want to be lifting 3 to 4 times a week max. So one, we can focus on other things that are more important that I'm going to get to in the next section. And we want to give ourselves a chance to recover, right? If you're going to the gym and lifting 5, 6, 7 days a week, it's going to be really, really tough for you to get the most you can out of those lifting sessions because you're not giving yourself a chance to recover. So 3 to 4 hard and heavy lifting sessions per week are going to be the sweet spot, okay? And the next point I have here is we want to be doing athletic lifts over bodybuilder lifts. Now, what does this mean, okay? So if we take 2 versions of the deadlift, okay? One is just we're trying to move as much weight as possible, and the other one is that we're trying to move fast and explosive. The deadlift that's going to be fast and explosive will provide more of a benefit to you as a pitcher than just trying to move the most weight possible. Now, there is a time and place where we are trying to get our deadlift numbers up, for example, so that we can become stronger. But for the most part, we should be trying to lift explosively, right? And this holds true with all of the other compound movements as well, okay? Under that, I have fast versus slow twitch. Now, this is just to build off of the last point I was making in that we want to be training those fast twitch muscle fibers. We want to be training the explosive deadlifts over just the slow and controlled deadlifts, okay? And I'm just using deadlifts as an example here. This holds true with all your other lifts, like I said. We want to be training those fast twitch muscle fibers because that's what you're going to need to produce elite power and elite velocity on the mound. Now, the next point that I have is 3 to 4 working sets per movement. Less is more when it comes to the gym, guys. You don't need to be doing 5, 6, 7 working sets because you're just going to tire yourself out, okay? And you don't actually need that many sets to grow muscle. Get in there, stimulate muscle growth, be explosive, and get out, okay? There are other things that you need to focus on besides lifting. Now, a really good way to cut your gym time down and actually get the most out of your lifting is by doing supersets. So say I have a dumbbell bench supersetted with a half kneeling single arm cable row, right? The dumbbell bench is gonna work those push muscles. The cable row is gonna work the pull muscles, okay? So we can actually superset those to maximize our time spent in the gym, okay? So what that looks like is doing your first set of dumbbell bench and then going right into your set of the cable rows, okay? Because you're training the push muscles and then the pull muscles, okay? So you could do these back to back, rest, and then go into your next superset, okay? It's gonna be really important. Okay, so the last point I have when it comes to lifting, if you're trying to throw 90 miles per hour, is that lifting is probably not the main thing, and you probably can't lift your way to 90, okay? I will say that again. Lifting is probably not the main thing, and you probably can't lift your way to 90. Okay, so what does this mean? If you're throwing 82 and you just start to get really, really strong, you might bump up 2 or 3 miles per hour, but it's not going to get you to 90, okay? There are way more important things that go into throwing harder and throwing 90 than just lifting. And I know that might come as, a little bit of a dagger to you guys who love the gym. I understand that, but just lifting alone is not going to get you to 90. Okay, so moving on to mobility. This is a very commonly overlooked piece of throwing 90. And it's not that guys aren't doing mobility, it's that they're doing mobility the wrong way, okay? So you want to improve your tissue quality first, and you want to do that by doing soft tissue work. Now, what does that mean exactly? You want to be getting a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball and digging into the spots of your body that are repeatedly tight. right? Because just going into a mobility exercise without improving the tissue quality first isn't going to reap much of a benefit, okay? So, for example, guys get really tight in their teres, right? This muscle here. That's super common in pitchers, okay? So you could get a lacrosse ball, get a tennis ball, dig into that spot for a minute or two, do that over the span of a couple days or a couple weeks, and then start to work into your mobility, right? Or you could superset those. Do 30 seconds on with the lacrosse ball and then go into an overhead shoulder mobility exercise, okay? That's going to be really important, and it comes into play with targeted mobility, okay? So figuring out which parts of your body are the most tight, attacking those with soft tissue work, and then getting the right mobility exercises that you need to improve that range of motion. And the next point I have is full range of motion. Now, we want to make sure whenever we're doing our mobility, whatever exercise you're doing, that we're doing it to a full range of motion, right? Because we want to be really good at actually getting into the positions that we're trying to create, okay? And building off of that, weighted mobility, because it's great to get into those positions, but we need to get out of them and actually be able to produce power from those positions. So adding weight, adding load to those mobility exercises is going to be a way for you to actually produce force out of that range of motion so you can translate it to the mound. Okay, so the last point I have about mobility here is that mobility is great, but you need to be able to move and explode out of the positions that we are creating by improving mobility, okay? This basically goes back to what I was just saying. It's awesome that you could do a full split, right? I personally can't, but if you could do a full split, but you can't actually move out of that position and you're weak in your hip flexors, right? If those muscles are just lengthened and you never actually train the contraction portion from that deep range of motion, then it's going to be really, really tough for you to actually take those positions, put them into your delivery, and produce higher velocity, okay? So we need to be training both getting into those positions and then getting out of them as well. Okay, so the last part of this video, and arguably the most important, is speed and plyometrics. Now, this is oftentimes the most overlooked aspect of throwing harder, okay? A lot of guys skip out on this, and you can't do that. And I'm gonna explain why. A lot of the time, this is the bridge between high strength and low velo, okay? You have probably seen, or maybe you might be one of these guys, pitchers who are really, really strong in the weight room. They can move weight like crazy, but they don't throw hard. It's probably because they're neglecting their speed and plyometrics, right? Because lifting weight is not the same energy system as producing power, okay? You need to be training both of those things, okay? And you can do those things like constraint sprints and jumping, right? So if you look at what the pitching delivery is objectively, it is a short, quick burst of energy. So we need to be training in a way that exposes our body into short, quick bursts of energy, right? Besides just throwing a baseball, okay? So doing things like constraint sprints, like a jump back sprint or a push-up start sprint, doing things like broad jumps, stationary broad jumps, and even jumping rope, which I'll touch on in a little bit. These are going to start to get our body moving in the way that we want so we can actually translate that to the mound, okay? And then the next thing is med ball rotational work. And this is a little bit more pitching specific, if you will. So obviously on the mound, we want to rotate our hips aggressively, right? That's how a lot of velo is produced. So if we're not doing med ball rotational work, we're leaving a lot of velo on the table, okay? And one of the best methods I've seen is actually taking these med ball rotational exercises and doing them on the mound, right? Because if we go back to throwing, right, and mound blending, we want these positions to show up on the mound, okay? So taking those rotational movements, say med ball shot put or something like that, doing it off the mound is going to start to teach our body to move that way when we get on the slope. Okay, so that's really important. And then jumping rope, right? This is something that I've been doing for the last couple of years. And honestly, I think it's been a huge key to me throwing as hard as I do now. Because when you're doing jump rope, you're teaching your body not only to be, bouncy and athletic, you're teaching your body how to sequence properly, right? Because if you're not sequenced correctly, if your timing is off, you're not going to be able to jump rope. You're not going to be able to, get over the rope and do, boxer steps or anything like that because your timing is going to be off, right? But if you're really clean with jumping rope, you're going to automatically teach your body to get better at sequencing and have better timing, okay? So jump rope, super important. If you don't have one, go get one and get really good at jump rope, okay? And then the last thing is, you might not be able to see it, but this is where athletic qualities really start to shine through with most guys, okay? The guys in my program, all of this is programmed in for them effectively to where it doesn't interfere with their lifting, it doesn't interfere with their throwing, right? And they're able to see results in, as little as 8 weeks by doing things just like this, right? Once we start adding this into their routines, they throw harder because they turn their bodies into athletic machines, okay? So it's super important. Now you can probably take these principles that I talked about, apply them into your own training and make decent progress. But if you want me to personally build you out a customized program that you can follow every single day so you don't have to guess, just like I did for Jimmy, just like I did for Sebastian, just like I did for Landon, and just like I did for Davis, then click the first link in the description below, book a call with me. We'll talk about your situation, where you're at, what you're struggling with, where you want to get to, and how I can help.